What if I told you that a tiny, quiet town in Australia became the scene of one of the most gruesome and shocking serial killings in history? A crime so horrifying that even hardened police officers were left traumatized. This isn't just another true crime story. This is a real-life nightmare, a twisted web of manipulation, torture, and murder, orchestrated by a man who saw himself as an executioner of society's so-called undesirables. It all started with a foul smell, a putrid, gut-wrenching stench that led investigators to an abandoned bank vault in Snowtown, South Australia. Inside, they found barrels. Not filled with chemicals. Not filled with water. But filled with bodies. Decomposing, rotting remains, 11 victims in total. How did this happen? How did a serial killing cult manage to operate for years without anyone stopping them? And what kind of evil mastermind could convince people to not only kill but to help him store their victims in barrels like trash? This is the terrifying story of the Snowtown Murders. But before we dive deep into this horrific case, I want to ask you something. Do you believe some people are just born evil? Or do you think life circumstances and manipulation can turn an ordinary person into a killer? Let me know in the comments. I want to hear your thoughts on this. And if you love deep, chilling true crime stories like this, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications, because trust me, this case is only the beginning. Now, let's go back in time and uncover one of the darkest chapters in Australian crime history. The mastermind, John Bunting's dark mind. To understand how the Snowtown murders happened, we first need to step into the mind of the man who orchestrated it all, John Bunting. From the outside, Bunting appeared to be a charming, friendly man, someone who could easily gain people's trust. But beneath that mask was a calculating, sadistic killer who saw himself as a vigilante, deciding who deserved to live and who deserved to die. A childhood of darkness. Bunting was born in 1966 in Queensland, Australia. His childhood, full of violence and cruelty. Some reports suggest he was sexually abused at a young age, an experience that left him with an uncontrollable hatred for pedophiles and homosexuals. This hatred would later drive his obsession with hunting down and torturing his victims. As he grew older, Bunting became fascinated with pain, control, and power. He reportedly worked in a slaughterhouse, where he took pleasure in killing animals, a chilling sign of what was to come. But here's what made him truly dangerous. His ability to manipulate people. He wasn't just a killer, he was a leader, a puppet master, pulling the strings of the people around him and turning them into killers, too. Building a cult of killers. By the 1990s, Bunting had moved to Adelaide, South Australia, where he started surrounding himself with like-minded individuals, people he could influence and control. He convinced his closest associates, including Robert Wagner, Mark Haydon, and James Vlassakis, that they were on a mission to rid the world of people they saw as weak, disgusting, or useless. But this wasn't just about murder. It was about torture. About sadism. About making their victims suffer in the most horrifying ways imaginable. And so, the killing began. Coming up next, we'll walk you through how Bunting selected his victims, how he tortured them, and the shocking way he disposed of their bodies, all while managing to convince his followers that they were doing the right thing. Stay with me. Because this story only gets darker from here. The victims, a deadly hit list. John Bunting didn't just kill at random, he had a system. A twisted logic. A hit list of people he deemed unworthy of life. His victims were not all strangers. Many were friends, acquaintances, and even housemates, people who trusted him, people who never saw the monster lurking beneath his friendly smile. But here's what made this case even more disturbing. Bunting didn't just kill. He played mind games with his victims. He tortured them. He made their last moments a living nightmare. And worst of all, he profited from their deaths. The selection process, who lived and who died. Bunting targeted people he saw as weak or disgusting, pedophiles, drug addicts, gay men, or simply people he didn't like. In his mind, he was cleansing the world. His victims included 1. Ray Davies. A mentally challenged man who was lured into a trap, brutally tortured, and murdered. His body was one of the first to be hidden in the barrels. 2. Troy Yud. The half-brother of James Vlassakis, one of Bunting's accomplices. He was murdered in his own home, with his body later stuffed into a barrel. 3. Fred Brooks. A 17-year-old boy who trusted Bunting. He was tortured for hours, electrocuted, burned, beaten, before finally being strangled. 4. Gavin Porter. A former heroin addict, and also one of Bunting's own housemates. He was strangled in his sleep before being dumped in a barrel like garbage. And the list goes on. 11 victims in total. Each death more horrifying than the last. But here's what's even more chilling. A financial motive, stealing from the dead. Bunting and his gang didn't just kill for the thrill. They took over their victims' identities. They collected social security payments, stole money from bank accounts, and even called up family members pretending the victims were still alive, all while their rotting corpses sat in barrels of acid. For months, years, they got away with it. Until one day, their crimes began to unravel. Stick with me. Because what happens next will shock you to your core. For years, John Bunting and his gang of killers operated in the shadows. Victim after victim, they tortured, killed, and stuffed their remains into barrels. 11 lives stolen. 11 souls silenced. And yet, no one suspected a thing. The police had received missing person reports, but Bunting and his crew were careful. They covered their tracks. They used their victims' identities. They kept the money flowing. But no matter how clever they thought they were, their gruesome secret was rotting away, quite literally, just waiting to be uncovered. The Warehouse of Horror, an unimaginable discovery. It was May 1999. A routine police investigation, an inquiry into a missing person, led officers to a small, run-down bank vault in Snowtown, South Australia. At first glance, nothing seemed unusual. Just an abandoned building in a quiet town. But inside, a smell. A foul, sickening stench that clung to the air, thick and suffocating. A smell so putrid that veteran officers gagged on the spot. Something wasn't right. When they forced open the old steel door, no one was prepared for what they found. Inside the dark, damp vault, plastic barrels stood in rows. And inside those barrels, 1. Bodies. 2. Severed limbs. 3. Rotting flesh, floating in acid. The discovery was unlike anything Australian police had ever seen. A killing ground disguised as a storage unit. A graveyard hidden in plain sight. But that wasn't even the most horrifying part. The killers were closer than anyone thought. As investigators examined the remains, a terrifying realization dawned on them. Some of the victims weren't just strangers, they were known to the killers. Some of them had even lived with their murderers. And worse, some of the killers were still walking free. The hunt was on. Police needed to find and capture the men behind this horror. But what they would uncover next would shock the entire nation. The discovery of the bodies in barrels was just the beginning. Now, the question was, who was behind these gruesome murders? And that answer would shock the nation. The web of killers unravels. Investigators worked tirelessly to trace the victims' last known connections. One name kept appearing over and over again, John Bunting. A man with a charming but chilling personality. A man who hated weakness and believed he was cleansing society. But Bunting didn't work alone. Authorities soon uncovered a network of accomplices, each playing a role in this twisted killing spree. 1. Robert Wagner, Bunting's right-hand man, fiercely loyal and just as brutal. 2. James Vlassakis, the youngest of the group, a troubled teen groomed into a murderer. 3. Mark Haydon, a quiet, calculating figure who helped cover up the crimes and store the bodies. Each of these men had blood on their hands. But when police finally closed in, none of them could have predicted how the truth would unfold. Shocking interrogations. The killers speak. Under intense questioning, James Vlassakis was the first to break. The youngest of the group, he had witnessed the murders firsthand, some of them even happened inside his own home. And the details he revealed. Pure nightmare fuel. Red Circle victims were tortured for hours, burned, electrocuted, and beaten before they were finally strangled. Red Circle Bunting kept detailed records of every kill, including trophies from some of the victims. Red Circle they recorded their victims' dying screams, playing the tapes back for their own sick pleasure. And the worst part? Red Circle they laughed about it. As confessions rolled in, police pieced together the true horrors of what had taken place over 7 long years. And now, it was time for justice. The trial, a nation holds its breath. The trial of John Bunting and his accomplices became one of the longest and most shocking in Australian history. Red Circle Bunting and Wagner were sentenced to life in prison without parole, the harshest sentence possible. Red Circle James Vlassakis, despite his role in the killings, received a reduced sentence for cooperating with police. Red Circle Mark Haydon, though he never personally killed anyone, was jailed for his role in covering up the crimes. Justice was served. But the scars of the Snowtown murders would never fade. A town forever changed. The small town of Snowtown would never be the same again. Red Circle, the bank vault, where the bodies were found, became a dark tourist attraction, though many locals wanted it destroyed. Red Circle families of the victims still live with the trauma, knowing their loved ones died in the most horrifying way imaginable. Red Circle, the case became one of Australia's most infamous crimes, inspiring movies, documentaries, and endless speculation. But there's one question that still lingers. Did John Bunting and his gang kill more than 11 people? To this day, some believe the real body count is much higher. And that chilling thought will haunt Australia forever. And now, I want to hear from you. Speech Balloon, what do you think about the Snowtown murders? Do you believe there were more victims? Let me know in the comments below. Stay safe, stay aware, and I'll see you in the next one.